Welcome to the second episode of the podcast A Journey into Fraud Prevention, where I try to figure out with my guest how they end up in fraud prevention and what keeps them there. I'm your host Ivan, and in this episode I'm joined by Calvin Tewari, who is the Senior Fraud Operation Manager at Booking.com. I know Calvin for a long 7 years. We both work in Gett, where Calvin started his journey as fraud expert, and continue to work together in Booking.com. Calvin has many different skills, and he has never stopped to learn something new. I learn from Calvin a lot of things which I apply in my daily work. Let me stop here and let's hear from him about his journey. Поехали. Calvin, thank you for joining us today. If you listened to the pilot episode, you already know the first question. In case you didn't, or someone who is the first time joining us today. Fraud prevention. What is fraud prevention for you?
Hey Ivan, great to see you as always. As I definitely listened to the first episode that you had with Sergey, and I really appreciate you inviting me on this podcast as well. So for me, the meaning of fraud prevention has actually evolved over my career. Initially, it just really meant stopping fraud. I was a new guy and I saw fraud and I thought, okay, I must stop fraud. And I think for your listeners as well, maybe I'll add some context. You know very much about this because I started my journey in fraud working with you, right? But over time, and again, for the listeners, me and you, we've worked together for a long time. And I think you've also seen this transition in me and the view that I'm going to express now. Over time, I stopped viewing fraud prevention just as something that you need to stop fraudsters, and I started understanding it more as fraud prevention in terms of being a business enabler. So it's about how fraud prevention allows the business to grow by protecting the customers, the product, third parties who use the platform or who might have their stolen credentials used on a platform as well. So this is for me what fraud prevention is.
Thank you for such a detailed answer. My expectation is that you believe in a phrase, in each growing business should be a place for fraud. It is one of the, let's call it, achievement when fraudsters start to consider a company.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a saying in fraud as well, right? If you don't have any fraud, then you don't really have a business, right? Or you're certainly killing your business, right? It means you're blocking a lot of good customers, a lot of good people. Probably more negative impact from this than from actually stopping fraud.
Maybe you're not even familiar that you have any problems. That's
That's the
another
other.
common problem, yeah.
Yeah, we've seen that as well, right? We noticed in real world examples that fraud is sometimes not a problem until it's a problem. When it shows up, if you don't have teams or people that look at it and look at the numbers to tell you that you have fraud, depending on what type of fraud you have, you'll find out later on that you had fraud and you're having fraud.
When you started your career in fraud prevention, what is your actually was first impression, like in general fraud prevention area about the industry? Do you like it or you find it strange?
Well, I think for me, fraud prevention is really critical aspect of the business. In my experience, I've mostly worked with payments fraud, and I understand also that this is connected to a lot of other types of fraud. Data around security, PII, personally identifiable information, etc. For me, the first impression when I first started was this is insane. This is very huge. It's grim, and I was a new guy. I saw just the tip of the iceberg, right? And I believe I just mentioned me and you worked together, and you remember this fraud. It was easy to find because we didn't have a mature fraud prevention setup, so there was enough fraud. And I was regretting even joining this industry. I thought, oh my God, this is insane. Everything here is on fire. And I started viewing the world through this lens that everything is fraud. So this was my very, very first impression.
And what are the hardest things when you're working with fraud prevention?
The most difficult things, the challenges, I would say, well, there are many challenges. One of the largest challenges as I see it is probably around the barriers to us sharing information. We know that fraudsters themselves, they see a lot of information, they share a lot of information with each other, and we operate as fraud professionals in a compliant environment where we're not allowed to share certain type of information. It's not as easy to openly discuss your fraud prevention strategies and so on. So this is, of course, one big challenge that we face. Another challenge that we face is that fraud is very dynamic and it changes all the time, and it's increasing in sophistication. Especially there's, for me, when I look at fraud, I look at pre-COVID and post-COVID, and I'm talking about the era in which many more new people came into the digital world to start conducting their everyday lives, to start making purchases, or to interact with companies to expose their information and data. And in this new environment, there's a lot more less tech savvy people, and fraudsters became more sophisticated and they started preying on these people. So this is a big challenge. It's a growing area of opportunity for the fraudsters.
Yeah, first of all, on your first impression about that we are not able to share company, you're already second person after Sergey who shared that we need some kind of startup. Please, who interesting to build it, please do it. Everyone will be so happy. I believe it's super complex and never happened in real world, because it's so much things you need to consider when you want to share something between different companies, specifically different countries. However, it might be something, some possibilities here. And the second, COVID, its effects on electronic commerce, like in a positive way. We see a lot of startups increase their revenue like 3 times, 4 times, and we see some crazy startups like companies who focusing on delivery food. They started getting like huge tons of orders during the COVID because it was only one options. And I feel that COVID helps fraud prevention like more than any other industries, because the companies start to realize, when they start to getting more and more orders, they start to face a lot of chargebacks. That's for them like open eye condition to say, oh my God, we have a problem. Do you believe if it's COVID never happened, it will be we will be on the same stage in fraud prevention?
It's hard to say, but I mean, again, coming from that data-driven perspective, like we operate in, I don't have any data, right? We don't have this A/B test. But what I can say is, I think there's definitely some points to what you said there, and I agree. In my perception, definitely my own personal experience and speaking with other merchants, there has been a dramatic pre and post-COVID change. We can even categorize this almost like history. We have these eras in fraud prevention, right? And yes, absolutely. While there's an increase in fraud and sophistication there from fraudsters, we have also benefited in the fraud prevention side. Not everyone, of course, but many of us have. There's more recognition. I think you're now based in the UK, and I've seen many articles from the UK government. That's one of the countries where fraud has spiked, right? A lot of different types of fraud, especially social engineering, and it's quite good. It's bad to see, right, that there's a lot of victims of this, but it's good to see that even the law enforcement authorities now are getting up to speed, and they're promoting information all the time to the general public. And I believe that companies as well, hopefully, are getting resources and fraud teams that can, fight this problem. So we are also growing on that side.
And speaking of fraud, have you ever committed fraud?
Well, I think this is a trick question, right? I hope it's a trick question.
I hope to.
I can't answer this question honestly, Van. I'm just kidding. No, I've never knowingly committed any fraud. I hope I've also not unknowingly committed any fraud. I mean, I use cheat codes in some video games and so on from time to time. I use YouTube walkthroughs, but I don't consider this the type of fraud that you're talking about here. I'll tell you something from a different angle, though. I work in payments fraud, and I did file a fraud chargeback back in 2003, I believe, 20 years ago. For people who may not know what a chargeback is, this is when you have your credit card and someone stole it or used it without your permission. And this is how you complain to your bank and try and get your money back. And I actually did this. Someone bought a nice holiday with my card. I think they went to some spa destination. I don't remember exactly where.
Actually, the quite interesting 2003. Is it a lot change like from the calling to bank and raise the chargebacks?
Yes, definitely. Also, a lot changed in fraud. I know when my card was compromised in this case because this was a physical purchase. It was a brand new card. I only used it once. I used it in a pub in London, Southwest London, Wimbledon, and I recall that someone walked away with my card for a long time. I was not a fraud prevention specialist back then. I was a little bit aware of this type of fraud and I was a bit concerned, but I didn't think anything at the time. For me back then, it was like an email or something or a call to the bank. I don't recall. These days, some banks have frictionless flows for customers. They just open an app and they dispute the transaction via the app. Other banks, depending on where in the world your listeners are, they may have to also call up. And unfortunately, there may be some banks as well where there's a lot of friction and even customers that have been impacted by fraud are not able to, benefit from credit card protection.
Yeah, it's quite funny things. I had a chat with my friend recently, 2 weeks ago from now, and he told me that nowadays, if you see some strange happens on your credit cards, you might get alerts in your mobile application if it's some innovation bank. And if you say, yeah, I couldn't recognize it, they block card immediately and they raise chargeback immediately as well, and it took them 20 days to return your money back. However, back to 2000s, as I remember when I worked in my first position, the fraud manual review, when we review chargeback as well, to, represent chargebacks from the customer side, you need to provide a lot of information. You need to prove that you never been in this country, you never use card in some areas where expectation that card details might be stolen. I know I see positive way from the customers. I would say the hardest part nowadays is for merchants because they start to face a lot chargebacks because customers knows what is chargeback and how represented it.
Yes, I agree. And again, this is a post-COVID change. Everyone understood. And unfortunately, some people also take advantage or abuse this process, right?
Yeah, and it again quite interesting things that you say you never commit fraud, the same as a surgeon never commit fraud, and both of you change countries since that. I don't know, it might be my professional things in feeling that something went wrong there, but I hope you didn't lie to us and say truth that you never committed fraud.
I'm going to have to end this podcast now. I think there's someone knocking at my door. They finally found me.
Cool. If we stop to speak about fraud prevention for a second, so let's say you are tired of fraud prevention. If you decide to change industry today, where are you going?
Well, I think you know me, Ivan. I will be retiring with my crypto millions. I know that Dogecoin is gonna hit $1, and I've got a lot of that, so I'm not going to be going anywhere. Retirement, but I'm kidding. Of course, the reality is I don't own Dogecoin. By the way, I'm not advising anyone to buy it. What I'm interested in is really payments and fintech. I think I've worked in this space in terms of fraud prevention, so I would probably go to the other side, not the fraud prevention side, but more on the payment side. It's a very big evolving space, and I think it's a lot of interesting things there. They're solving a lot of problems for consumers across the globe, and I think this is a good space to move to.
Do you have any, dream companies where you want to explore your opportunities as a payment or fintech expert?
I haven't really thought too much about it, to be honest. I've been very immersed in my current role and company. But if I had to choose, I would probably go to one of the large issuers or PSPs, companies like maybe Visa, MasterCard, or even neobanks, etc. On the other side, when we talk about banks. When we talk about PSPs, you've got very innovative companies now that are offering services to mid and enterprise merchants alike. And they do a lot of on the fraud prevention side, they have a lot of out of the box solutions. So we talk about companies like Adyen, for example, Stripe, maybe. These are good examples.
Nice. Please, if someone listen from the Adyen or Stripe, Calvin is not looking for any jobs right now to any changes. But if you would like, please contact him. It's extra advertising from this podcast. Let's talk about future. When I first time watched Back to the Future 2, I knew that in 2015 I will have a flying skateboard, Nike sneakers. When I started my career in 2012, I believe that in 2022 we will not see any new fraud trends. Tell me about your expectations when you first start your work as a fraud expert.
Well, before I tell you about my expectations, Ivan, you know that they actually released those shoes. I think they're called Nike Air Mags or something like this. And I can't remember the price. I feel like they're very high value and collectible. And since we're talking about fraud prevention here and credit cards as well, I wonder how many of those were purchased with stolen cards or payment methods.
You know, that's funny because I remember, I signed in for watch list to get one of them. It was like 200 pairs of shoes, something like that. And the price started from $500 or $600. But yeah, I don't know anyone who got them. I know a couple of celebrities who posted something on Instagram to say they arrived. However, I never heard any legit story that someone actually bought them and get them in the same price as they bought.
Well, let me answer your question though. So when I first started, I think I mentioned this earlier, I was not really data driven. I was learning fraud, as many entry level professionals in fraud. We don't come from a fraud university. There's nothing like a degree. We tend to come from various backgrounds, usually start in a kind of manual review type of function. And that's how I was working. And so I was not data driven. I only saw what was immediately in front of me. And, as I mentioned, everything looked like fraud. But my expectations for the future actually is a bit different. Now that I'm more experienced and now that this industry has also progressed quite a lot, I think despite all of these challenges that we talk about here today, with fraudsters increasing in sophistication, the good fight is also benefiting. Right, we have a lot of let's say fraud superheroes, more people joining us. It's like Avengers Assemble or something like this. We're getting more and more people coming. Fraud as a career path is actually way more mature now, way more structured. There's a lot of highly skilled people that are showing up, and there's more visibility, more resources. And I think my expectations for the future is that this battle is going to continue, right? The fraudsters in some ways help us to continue to innovate because they're sophisticated and smart. They push the boundaries, and I don't see this battle stopping anytime soon. I believe fraud began the moment humans started being able to take advantage of each other, let's say. And unfortunately, it will continue, and there's always going to be a need for people on the good side to protect the good side and protect businesses. So yeah, those are my expectations. This is a long-term future in terms of this career pathway.
Well answered. It's really a lot of details, and I send in for each of the words from your answer. I actually have the last question, and I hope you're not tired to answer my questions, and this one gonna be, I believe, last one, but we'll see. Would you recommend fraud prevention as career path for someone who is looking to change their career or looking for a first job? Maybe you can give a bit of advice to these people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I want to say thanks to you, Ivan, as well, for shining a light on this space and having a podcast that's just really about the career itself, because we need to attract more and more people. We are attracting people, but spreading information of how to get into this space is very good. I would definitely recommend considering it. I think this fraud prevention field provides a really challenging and dynamic environment to work in. It means you have to constantly stay updated with the evolving fraud tactics and the technologies to develop effective countermeasures to these. Also, successfully preventing fraud, it leads to great satisfaction at a personal level. You know that you're safeguarding company people, you're on the good side. And I think at least me, and I hope many people get a lot of satisfaction from just this. I know that you're in London right now, so I'll use bit of British slang here. I would add that it's not everyone's cup of tea, though, right? So to be clear, we're not here to say to everyone, hey, come on over here, work in this space. You have to know your personality type and whether you suit the kind of roles. There are a lot of different types of roles in fraud prevention. So I would say if you're interested, step number one, do some research before choosing which path you want to go on. If you already have a lot of technical skills, whether it's analytical or you're a developer or someone that's just really savvy around lots of different things with technology, then the next part is just about the domain expertise to understand the area you will work in. And again, if you read free information on the internet, speak with fraud professionals, listen to the Journey into Fraud Prevention podcast, this is a good starting point to start understanding whether you want to actually pursue a career.
Calvin, thank you so much for joining me today. It was nice to talk and hear your story. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. And if you want to find out more about Calvin's journey, you can listen once again. You can speak with Calvin maybe on one of the conference or maybe communicate him. I don't know. It's one of the... See you in next episode. Don't forget to follow the podcast and share it with your friends. Cut.